Well met, my friends. I have a rather large repertoire of posts that are about theming Linux, guides about Linux, and reviewing Linux. But I've never actually talked about why anyone, including you, should use Linux, because it is actually more important than you think. Linux is more than just a niche hobby or a simple alternate operating system that one can use. A lot of people have the impression that Linux is not very user-friendly, that it's annoying and not as compatible when compared to Windows, and so on and so on. And to an extent, you would be correct in thinking those things. However, in spite of all those annoyances, it is actually still worth it because there is a looming threat above the horizon. One where companies are able to do anything at the behest of any government. They control and they lobby them. A threat where the software that we rely on are owned and controlled by a singular entity. In other words, leaving us at their mercy. They may include spyware and tracking and may siphon the data, use it for malicious reasons, and the financial gains they get by doing these things they might use in ways that are against anyone's best interest except for the top 1% or the people that are leading said entity, which can be any company, in this case Microsoft. They'll gain a very large amount of control over you and over anyone in the world simply because everyone relies on their service. It's an argument where centralization, a monopoly on a service that everyone relies on, creates a single point of failure, one that we've seen has the potential of causing severe troubles around the entire world, both on an individual and a collective level. We've seen this, it's happened. So whilst I will demonstrate in the coming minutes that using Linux can be an art form, it can also simply be an alternative to Windows that I think most people should adopt. It used to be a lot more difficult than it is now, and I think now is probably one of the best times. People may immediately react negatively to the thought of switching to Linux, with some of the reasons being, what about my games? What about my software? Or what about my time that I will need to spend learning a completely new workflow? I think over the time Linux has evolved to a point where the troubles of swapping are small enough and well worth what you gain in return. There are some significant benefits to swapping now, and not only will you be freed from the grasp of certain companies and governments, but the benefits that you get are on their own well worth it, and I will demonstrate that. So with all that said, I need to go through these topics. This post does have chapters if you want to see specific ones out of order. However, I do recommend looking at linearly because there is a common thread. Using Linux-based operating systems, you need to learn to do certain things differently. Different isn't bad, but it does mean that you need to spend some time learning it. For instance, maybe a different way of navigating your computer, or a different way of installing packages and programs. This is fine. Do not be afraid of learning new things. It may seem daunting at first, but it really is quite simple. Once you get used to it, it really isn't a problem. But then there's the question of software. A lot of software can only be used on Windows. There are no Linux native builds for them because companies haven't thought to make one. Because of the smaller market share Linux has, you can to an extent bypass these issues with tools such as Wine. But learning how to do this requires time. User interfaces can be a bit strange because Linux-based operating systems are inherently different with many available distributions. So many different varieties that can be set up differently. For instance, the user interface of the operating systems. They vary between Plasma, GNOME, Cinnamon, or more experimental varieties even. Instead of just installing Windows that provides you with everything, you have a lot more options with Linux, and a lot of options to some can be a bit daunting. It isn't difficult to deal with, however, once again, it does require time. Games have become extremely easy to run on Linux, even if they don't have native versions, specifically as a result of Wine and Proton. However, there are outliers, and some games won't work on Linux for one reason or another, and this is also a sacrifice that you'll have to make, at least temporarily until the market share may increase, giving game developers a higher incentive to create Linux compatibility. And this can be extended further from games to software. Many do work with workarounds, however, a lot of them don't. That isn't to say that you can't find alternatives. You definitely can, but again, switching your workflow requires you to sacrifice some of your time. But I think I mentioned in the intro that these sacrifices that you need to make, they used to be quite a lot bigger. However, now, in the modern day, they're so few and far between that I really don't think it's a major annoyance. And there's benefits to swapping, not only ideological, but also material benefits. So, what are the benefits? When you accept that a very important service that you use will be owned by a large corporation in another country, you essentially concede to being in their hands. They might siphon data for marketing purposes or for spying. We know that these companies are inherently extremely greedy, and as a result of greed, their market share will be turned into a rather unfortunate circumstance in the future. And I say in the future, however, if you observe the reality, I think you can notice that this has already happened. And I can sit here and mention how it's never good to allow this kind of situation to arise, not only for operating systems, but for any product and any service. But the fact is, regarding computers and operating systems, there is an ample opportunity for this to no longer be the case, specifically because of Linux-based operating systems. The fruit of Linux is extremely ripe in the moment, and there's a lot of opportunity for anyone and everyone to boycott Windows and move over to Linux-based operating systems. We've seen how issues with software can, even in a non-malicious setting, cause major issues and disasters that are infrastructure related, simply because there's a single point of failure. And currently there are so few hurdles and sacrifices that you need to make to swap over to Linux that I think, even with the ideological benefits in mind, I think it is worth it. You'll finally be more in control of the software that you use. This is worth it, because in many such cases, by the time you realize that you should have swapped, it might be too late. Think about it for a second. The company will no longer be able to decide what should come pre-installed with your system, what kind of bloatware or spyware that should be baked into the operating system. Instead, those decisions go to you. You decide. You have the control. This is kind of the essence of the right to repair movement as well, to put the user in control, the consumer. You've purchased the hardware. You deserve and you should have the right to be able to do anything with it. To me, these so-called ideological benefits, but you can call them whatever, is good enough reason to swap over to Linux. And it's worth the sacrifices that you'll have to make, many of which will be more and more temporary as market share grows and Linux adoption in the consumer space grows. Linux gives you an immense amount of choice. Do you want your desktop environment to look like this? Or maybe this? Or maybe this? All of this is possible. The open source tools for you to create any of this exists. Or maybe you want to download some presets and use that. Or maybe simpler desktop environments that still look good and still are customizable. With Linux, you can personalize the entire experience to match what you need. Maybe you want to create something entirely custom, learning basic scripting and programming on the side as well, which lets you create extremely beautiful desktop environments that are also highly personalized to your needs. Linux is free and open source, which means not only is the code under the scrutiny of the public, but many of the software, in the same vein, follows that philosophy, open and free. Unlike a large set of Windows-specific software that is closed source and licensed, which the code cannot go under the scrutiny of the public eye. You may never know what may be lurking in the code, things that might have a exploitative nature. Furthermore, in 2026, there's enough productivity applications and web-based applications, such as the ones offered by Proton, that transposing your workflow from Windows, at least when it comes to basic software and tools, it isn't a problem anymore. The amount of time it takes is quite negligible, and it's worth the ideological and practical benefits, which I will discuss in further detail. Another benefit is Linux over the years has really relied on community support. Because there's no official support for a lot of the software, the community has had to learn how to fix problems. So there's a lot of resources in how to fix and solve bugs. Entire communities built around it, and it is much easier to find help compared to niche Windows-related bugs that might be an extreme annoyance, and you might not know how to fix it, other than maybe reinstalling your Windows system because a software you installed broke something or caused severe performance hits. Now, it is true that there is this misconception that Windows has a lot less bugs than Linux, but I'd argue that this simply isn't true. Linux is a lot more bloat-free. It runs a lot quicker with way less overhead, and if you take care of your system and are mindful, it is usually extremely stable, more so than Windows is. It is true that user error might lead to more jarring issues and bugs, but these are always fixable. And once you learn how to fix it and what caused it, you will just add that to your repository of knowledge that you already know about the computer. You'll learn something new and you'll understand it. Furthermore, like I mentioned, there is a large community that is ready to help you solve these problems that are user errors. You do generally need to have more responsibility when you are more in control, which Linux gives you. It gives you this control. Unless you use more locked down Linux-based operating systems such as SteamOS, or more user-friendly operating systems such as Pop! OS, Zorin, Mint, Ubuntu, and so on and so on. But I'd argue that this control that it gives you and this higher sense of responsibility is a benefit because it means that you're in control. You don't give that away to a company. Linux is not as difficult as it's been made out to be. If you compare the aforementioned Linux distributions, the ease of use is comparable and even better than Windows or Mac OS even. Nearly all of the difficulty simply stems from the fact that companies have not officially made their products natively support Linux, which is a problem that may be solved as they gain an incentive to do so, which larger market share will grant. As more people use Linux, they will more vocally ask for their favorite software to get Linux builds. Unlike Windows, Linux distributions tend to ship with way less bloatware and analytics-related software. These things aren't baked into the operating system, and optimization matters. All of this means Linux, by default, is a lot more performant than Windows. You can even install a Linux distribution onto an older computer and see massive performance gains. This increases their lifespan and also reduces waste. The overhead is so low on Linux compared to Windows that even when you run games behind the Wine or Proton translation layer, it may still run faster than it would run on Windows. So even good computers will see benefits by swapping over to Linux. This is something I've noticed, and it is one of the major reasons why I can't switch back to Windows. I'll immediately notice how slow it is in comparison. Now, what I'm about to mention might be placebo, but whenever I swap to Windows, I immediately notice how the operating system isn't customized to my preferences, and how it immediately feels a lot chunkier and a lot slower. It doesn't let me do the things I want to do immediately. It doesn't give me this control. After using Linux for so long, Windows by default simply doesn't feel good to use anymore. I might have missed quite a lot of benefits, but as I've probably demonstrated, using Linux has significant material benefits, along with the ideological benefits. If you've seen my previous posts, which I highly recommend by the way, you'll notice that I've made a hobby out of creating and customizing Linux desktops. I like to create custom UIs, custom elements for user interfaces, custom wallpapers, all that stuff for Linux with the various open source tools and frameworks that exist. I even have a beginner-friendly guide on how to start doing these kinds of things. Customizing Linux is, in my opinion, a very beautiful art form that involves design. It is a form of expression where you can create something that really matches your personality and also matches your preferred workflows. You can create a desktop that fits your needs. So it's not only expression in terms of art and design, but it can also increase your productivity. It's a type of practical expression that doesn't have any limit other than your own creativity. And I started doing it by simply customizing a desktop environment such as Plasma. And I quickly grew more and more addicted to doing this. I highly recommend trying this out. Furthermore, it's the perfect way to start learning basic programming and scripting, because these tools aren't difficult to use. They're not as difficult as creating a fully fledged website, and yet you can create beautiful results. It lets you become a better problem solver because you have a design, an idea, now you need to actually program it into existence. It is extremely satisfying when you successfully do so. If that is too daunting of a concept for you, or maybe you want to become even better at problem solving or programming, I would like to take a moment, a short break, to introduce you to the sponsor of this project. I'm talking about Brilliant. I've had the opportunity to use Brilliant, so I can attest to the fact that it has such a great amount of resources and courses for you to choose from, helping you learn and become a better problem solver, a skill that is invaluable in the real world. Their programming course is perfect if you want to learn how to program with functions, for loops, variables, all that stuff. It teaches you how to solve actual problems with code. an extremely useful skill that is not only very productive, but very satisfying. Great if you want to learn and become better at theming Linux, or maybe even land a programming gig where you'll create things with code. You can download their mobile application, perform daily tasks, and make a habit out of learning. Or you can view their web application online and allocate longer times of study. Brilliant lets you personalize the process to fit your needs. If not programming, there's likely a course for you. For instance, I personally have a knack for their mathematics-related courses, for instance, calculus, something I've been wanting to improve on, and Brilliant has helped tremendously. It makes it much less arduous, and it is a more modern way to learn these subjects. A perfect platform to add to your tool belt. You can use my link or scan the QR code to start learning for free for an entire 30 days. Furthermore, that will also grant you a 20% discount on the annual subscription. It grants you access to all of the courses and all of the learning material that Brilliant has to offer. Many thanks to Brilliant for choosing to sponsor this project. I really like the platform, and the goals of education highly align with my goals of this kind of post and the kind of stuff that I like to make. And many thanks to you for choosing to watch this. So, as I've mentioned, the fact of the matter is that there's a large amount of ideological and material benefits to swapping over to Linux. Furthermore, there's also the expression, the art form of Linux, the customization, personalization that you can do, customizing it to perfectly match your workflow, your pipeline. And these things aren't immediate. They don't have to be. You can slowly get better at using Linux and learn how to do these things step by step. You can start with a simple desktop environment such as Plasma on Zorin, and slowly but surely get more experimental, learn more things. With time, you'll perfectly swap your workflow, your pipeline to Linux from Windows or any other operating system. If you don't use Linux, this is something I highly recommend you at least trying. Now, if you're already using Linux, then good. I don't need to convince you. However, if you're still skeptical, if you're still not convinced, there's still a few more things that I should mention. And one of which, in my opinion, is quite important because, in a way, it is ephemeral. Often it is that Linux users speak of the year of the Linux desktop, seemingly a metaphor to when so many people in mass start swapping over to Linux that companies create Linux builds for their software, which leads to more people swapping, which leads to more software, more compatibility, which leads to more people, creates a cycle, escape velocity, if you will. But this hasn't happened yet, and it is because of the fact that Microsoft is a massive company, one that can incentivize hardware manufacturers to ship their products with Windows, to incentivize default softwares, to incentivize companies to use their platforms and their software. They have this financial advantage because, unlike Linux, Windows is for profit. One must ask how they've managed to gain this immense amount of control in the market. And no, it isn't because it is an amazing piece of software. It is because of their immense amount of finances, the immense amount of leverage they can have in the world. Now, it might be easy for me to say the European Union should implement forth a law that forces hardware manufacturers to give options, to let you choose between Linux or Windows, maybe at a discount for Linux because it is free. They don't need to pay that commission. Kind of in the same manner, they've already made laws for companies to actually need to give you the option to swap search engines from Google, for instance, because they've had such a monopoly. Now, while this can kind of work, I don't think it's the best way to solve this problem. Instead, consumers deliberately doing it, I think, would send a stronger signal, because Linux already has the major market share in servers because it is more stable and more performant. But in the consumer space, one must ask the question, when? How good does it have to get for people to start swapping? I would argue it doesn't matter. People simply don't want to swap. Even if it's better, they have Windows, they're used to it. Why swap to something else? That is a deliberate choice you have to make, which is why I'm making this post. I think it is important to take the initiative because not only do you make a statement that will lead to ideological benefits in the long term, in the future, but also practical benefits. There is ample opportunity to swap to Linux, now more than ever. And I don't think it will get much better than this until people in mass start to decide to swap over to Linux. And I'm not only suggesting this to everyone because of the immense ideological benefits. I kind of actually don't really care. It is simply such a great piece of operating system because of all the customization you can do, because of all of the performance benefits. that I think that's worth it alone. But in spite of that, there are lots of reasons to swap over. And yes, while there are sacrifices that you would make, and certain annoyances and certain times where you do need to dedicate your time to learn, it isn't a bad thing. Learning is good. It is good for your mind. It isn't something that you should think of in a hostile manner. Governments often have ulterior motives to doing certain things, to implementing forth certain laws, frame them as protecting certain groups of people, when in reality it is about monitoring people. It is about gaining tools that they can use as means of surveillance. Not good. What if in the future there becomes a massive need to protest against the government and they can suddenly, immediately know who is likely to do so? These kinds of movements to protect the free nature of the internet. I think swapping to Linux is a major step in that direction because, once again, unlike Windows that might have built-in spyware, Linux is free and open. Now, in an effort to make this entire thing concise, I'm not going to give any more arguments. But if you still don't want to swap over, I would like to know why. And what would make you want to swap? Do let me know, I am curious. Likewise, if you're planning to switch, do let me know. And if you're already on Linux and think there's more arguments to using it, to swapping, that I haven't mentioned, do let me know. So, let us continue, because it is not the end. When I first started using Linux, it really wasn't an immediate thing. I was learning programming and I wanted to move over to Linux because I knew it was kind of easier to code on Linux, easier to download the tools that you need. So I made a dual boot, where I mostly used Windows and had a Linux dual boot that I can go to here and there and learn. Eventually, I started customizing it more and more. I started installing my games over to Linux and managed to move certain productivity applications to Linux. I swapped my editing software to one that I much prefer and one that runs natively on Linux. Same thing goes with music software. I did many kinds of user error and caused quite a few bugs, but I learned how to solve them as a result of the immense help from the community. More and more, I started using Linux, and swapping over to Windows immediately felt jarring. It was so slow in comparison, so bloated. It wasn't nice using it because it wasn't customized. I couldn't customize it to my preferences. It felt so much like a chore to swap over to Windows that I eventually stopped using it. I deleted the Windows partition, and now I would only use Windows to test software if I needed to create something and test it on both Windows and Linux. In other words, I'm never interested in swapping over to Windows. Even if there are certain games that I might want to play, I simply would take that sacrifice. It's not worth it to swap over simply because of one game. Bad Windows software updates, much slower performance, much more bloated, lots of issues and AI shenanigans baked into the operating system. In other words, a bad trajectory that the operating system is heading towards. So I use Linux. My personal preference is Arch Linux and sometimes Nix OS. However, of course, that is my personal choice. You might choose anything and test things and eventually find something you like. There are so many distributions to choose from, and all of them have their own quirks and their own features. And with time, you can learn more and more about specific ones until you find something you like. And if you've enjoyed this post, do follow, because I do test and review many of the Linux distributions, and I have many Linux-related projects in the works and not so Linux-related projects in the works, although maybe tangentially linked to Linux in some way or another. I hope that the points I've brought forth to you resonate with you. If they don't, so be it. I tried. The time to start using Linux is now, and I look forward to creating more stuff and more content related to showcasing what you can do with Linux. I wish you good luck.